sorry, remember to start integrity. We'll get going for real here. So, what do you learn in that process? You've got some stuff to relearn, right? So, this 4-hour review, not sufficient. Okay, it's not sufficient to get you what you need. So we'll, if you want state-specific stuff, if you're going to a specific state and you want input on where to go, try to reach out to me and I'll do my best to help you. There's not good resources for all the states, but for most there are. Somebody offers an in-person review. So Tom Thutt, y'all are going to Tom Thutt's review. That's the best thing to do for North Carolina, for example. So there's other states that do the same thing. So we'll go through the federal law here, and this is what we're gonna. This is my crew. Oh, my kids are tall. I'm bald. And twice this week, this guy wears my shoes without asking, and she wears my shirt without asking. So that's weird. And I've come to realize that, with the students, you all are probably on the verge, but the P1s are closer to being my kids' age than my age. Yeah, that's rough. But that's reality. That's reality. So this is not exhaustive. You will be exhausted probably by the time you get done, but this is not exhaustive. This is what we're going to do. Look at that. We're almost right on time. Okay. So we're going to break down the MPJE. We're going to go through the registration bulletin just a little bit, give you kind of the nuts and bolts, what to expect, what's going to be on there, etc. Then we'll talk about, for just a little bit of time, how do I suggest you prepare for it. Okay. And then we'll take a little break, and then we'll do federal law for about an hour and a half, and then we'll wrap up with Tennessee law. Sound all right? Okay. Anything else? Anything you hope to get out of this? So what the passing score, we'll talk about that. Other things? Great, I can do that. That shouldn't be hard. Okay. I don't know if you saw what they did last year, but it wasn't good. So you look at our pass rates for, I tried to blow this up, but it got really, really grainy. So 16 grads to 85.71. This is what you will be evaluated by, and your institution will be evaluated by. First time pass rates. Okay, 85%, 96%. Flip that number around, 68% last year. Okay, I didn't do anything different, and I can tell you that in the review that I do, I had students from, I think, 20 different colleges. To my knowledge, no one failed from those 20 colleges, okay, other than our own. So that sucks, right? For, NAPLEX, you do bad on the NAPLEX, it's everybody but me, right? You do bad on the MPJE, they're looking at me like, what'd you do, man? Like, I didn't do anything different. So you've got to put in the work. I don't know what happened here. Based on those that I've talked to that did this, they did not put in the time. The other thing that I've seen that I just don't understand is there are people that are doing this as I'm going to do a practice one. I'm going to go in, I'm going to pay the money, and then I'll see what it's like, and then I'll study the second time around. That is asinine. Don't do that. Okay? That is wasted money. Wasted money. And I can tell you, of these students, a large majority were between 72 and 74. Okay? And the passing score is 75. Okay, so you're just right on the edge of passing. And there were several 75s. So they were right on the edge as well. So there were I think one in the 90s and several 80s, but most are in that set between 70 to 79 range. So it's really tight, and every question matters. Okay, so I don't say that to scare you, but I sort of do. You've got to put in the work to pass this thing, and I would say it's not a whole lot. Tennessee is tough, but most of the other states are pretty tough too, because they're all using the same question bank now. That's why they ask in this jurisdiction, because I can use that question in North Carolina just like I can use it in Tennessee, right? I don't have to change the wording even. I just keep it in this jurisdiction. When I switch states, it's now North Carolina, right? So that's the way you're going to see them worded. The registration bulletin, have you all looked at this? You probably have. Okay, you may be focusing more on it for the NAPLEX. NAPLEX and MPJE are in the same registration bulletin. Strongly encourage you to go through there and look at it. I'm going to show you the practice items that they include in there. They're not very good items, but I'll show you the ones that they include in there. Encourage you to spend time. This is the blueprint, or the 3 different areas that you will see. And I don't know if this is that helpful or not, but I'll kind of map it to each area. Pharmacy practice makes sense, right? License, registration, certification. So this is going to be about CE, for example. How many hours of CE you have to have. What does the pharmacist in charge have to do, etc. And then you've got a little bit of regulatory structure and terms. That's where you might see Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Durham-Humphrey Amendment, Tue Apr Harris. You might see some of that, just basics, history, and things like that. So those are your 3 big areas. If I was going to map them on federally, pharmacy practice, you've got to pay attention to your Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That's where we learned about adulteration and misbranding. A lot of stuff's going to come back to those 2 things, right? We'll talk about that. We'll review that. Your Federal Controlled Substance Act, and then the subsequent DEA regulations. Lots and lots and lots of stuff on the MPJE about that. Your State Controlled Substance Act, or the equivalent. Every state's going to have one. So Controlled Substance Act was in 1970 federally. And then shortly thereafter, you're going to find a state one that some of them will just say, do what the federal government says. Others will add a little bit of stuff. Most will add something, and Tennessee does. That's highly likely that the state where you're going to practice will too. Every state has some sort of Pharmacy Practice Act or equivalent, so you need to hang out there. Huge one, right? The rules of the Board of Pharmacy. So federally, or for the MPJE in general, the 2 main areas you're going to want to focus, here and here. And then there'll be a little bit of HIPAA over stuff, which I don't anticipate that you'll struggle with, but we'll review that just a little bit. You've taken enough HIPAA trainings to know what HIPAA means, I would hope. And how many have you taken? 30 something? 40? You know all the answers. You don't even have to go through it. All right, the next one. I don't know if this is that helpful. Oh, shoot. You want a handout? Yeah, that'd be helpful, wouldn't it? I didn't want to give them to you because I knew you'd cheat on the Kahoot. Not that cheating is a sore subject or anything. It's really weird, though. You know, I'll go ahead and tell you, it's really weird that there are still people 2 years later, right? Still people that, well, if I'm walking, they'll like walk the other way, like they do not want to talk to me. Get over it, okay? I was over it the next week, so get over it. Okay, so you've got 2 things. I'm going to send you around the handout, and then following that, and it looks really similar, only it says study guide on it, and this is a study guide. That is going to look very similar to the study guide that you have when you were a P2, so use these instead, because there's a few things that have changed since then. Back at the paper. Okay. You won't really use the study guide today, but you can go through the handout, and there it'll help you follow along. Sorry, I forgot to hand that out. Okay, and then this one, I don't even know where to tell you to focus. It's just 2%. That's not very many questions, but I think if you cover the other areas, you'll be fine. This is how this thing breaks down. So there's 120 questions on it, and 100 of them matter, but you won't know which ones matter. So 20 of them, they're going through this process of testing the items, right? Because Dr. Diller was here last Thursday to talk to the P2s, and I'd never really heard a time frame, but he said, just kind of off the cuff, that it takes about 2 years to get an item in to the MPJE. Okay, so the way that it gets into the MPJE is by having these 20 guinea pig items in there to figure out how do they perform. So it's all this psychometric analysis that you're not going to know about, but you need to not freak out when you see 2 or 3 items that are very similar. You'll get to the point where you're like, I already answered that question. Right? And then you start questioning, like, well, if I'm getting it again, that probably means I answered it wrong. I'm not going to pick A this time. I'm picking B. Right? And then you'll get it like a third time, you start really freaking out. Like, what are you going to do? So you need to know that you're going to see some similar items. Mine were in the area of manufacturing, distributing. You start to get a little bit of a complex. Okay? So you got to stick to your guns. If you think the answer is right, keep answering it the same every time if you get 3 similar items. All right? That's a big deal. Don't start making assumptions. This is where people go downhill very quick. If you get, and this is something that I've helped people with that have failed it across the U.S. If you get into this habit of going down rabbit trails and making assumptions about the cases or the hypotheticals that are in the item, you will get it wrong. Okay? You have to take it for what it's worth in those words. If you start assuming, well, I'm going to assume that it's a 24-hour store. No, don't make any assumptions. Go with what you have and answer it based on that. Does that make sense? Huge. That's the biggest thing that people do wrong on this and don't pass. It's 2.5 hours. I would say most people don't take that long, but you've got that long. You've got essentially 1 minute and 15 seconds per item. Okay, so that should be plenty of time. It's similar to what you had in law and ethics, and you can think of, a lot of people get done with law and ethics exams fairly quickly, right? So most people didn't take those 50 minutes for 30 items. So you got plenty of time. You can't go backwards, remember? So that can freak you out a little bit, but it's computer adaptive. So the way that you answer impacts the question you get next. Right? So there's no way you can do that and go back. Right? So you've got to, it's a one-way street. Right? So you've got to kind of time yourself, and there'll be a way to time in there. Right? So that shouldn't be an issue. But pay attention to your time. That's another thing that I've heard from people that have not done well, is that they just didn't pay attention to their time, and then they had a bunch at the end. So you don't get too slow at the beginning. Try to keep pace. It may not be a bad idea to have, okay, I know I've got 120. At 30 items, where should I be as far as my time? Just have some little checks that make you feel comfy. Maybe it's just an hour. But some way to keep track to make sure you don't have 30 items in 5 minutes at the end, right? There's a tutorial offered, so they'll walk you through. It's really easy to think, I don't need this, but I would just encourage you to do that when you get in there. That they'll walk you through how to answer the items, how to proceed through the test. Do it. Okay, it's not worth taking the chance on doing something wrong or skipping an item, etc. Your score is 75, so that's not 75 out of 120, 75 out of 100. It's 75. So if somehow they've determined that this is the way that I think this is a faculty vacation thing, but it's just as easily computer adaptive MPJE. So you start out, they're going to start you out at, all right, we're going to start him out at 75. He gets 4 right in a row, nailing it. He's up in the 80s. Okay, different items start coming. Oh no, we're down below. The goal is by the time you're done, you just have to, doesn't matter if you go dip below a few times. By the time you're done, you got to be back at 75 or higher. Okay? So, if you're doing really well, you may get harder items. Okay? So, don't freak out. Just take every item for what it's worth and don't make assumptions. Proceed. Okay? Does that make sense as far as how it works?
So then if you're doing really well, would you end up getting like a lot or more harder questions than other people would?
Not necessarily, but I think that they will. I think that they will test you to see, well, like how high can you go, right? And so I think that there is some norming back down. But if you're doing really well, you're going to be in the 80s or 90s. But you know what? When you walk out, you're going to feel like, okay, I'll see you in 30 days because I just bombed that thing. I'm telling you, I've never heard of anyone walk out of there and say, I nailed it. Right? You don't feel that way. You don't feel that way with this test. And it's really frustrating. I mean, I came here knowing I had to teach the course, walked out, like, I'll see you back. Right? I mean, I thought that I had failed. I got an 82 when I took it. So that was 8 years ago now. But yeah, so don't worry about how you're feeling. Just keep going, because I'm telling you, however many took last 35 out of 35 walked out of there feeling like they had failed it. I guarantee you. Okay? So just don't. Walk out of there feeling like you failed it, but don't fail it. All right, here are your different question types. There's drinks back here. All right, so what do you think about that item? What's the answer? Yeah, so you can't help but go Tennessee, right? Because it says in this jurisdiction. Right, so let's pretend it's Tennessee.
30.
30 is right. Okay, so there's some confusing stuff in here, right? One, you need to pay attention to hours versus units. Okay, those are different. Do you remember this? 10 hours equals 1 unit. So you need to pay attention to that. This second renewal stuff, it's confusing, right? And in Tennessee it doesn't matter. But in some states it might. So in Tennessee, you get licensed and then your license expires when? 2 years from the date you're licensed. Okay? But some states go by the calendar year. So if you get licensed in November, you might have to renew your license in January. Okay? So the reason they're asking this second renewal stuff is they can do that. That takes that prorating thing or the licensing requirements off the table across all the states. So they can ask this question anywhere, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so in Tennessee it doesn't matter if it's the first, second, whatever, it's 30. But in some states it might. That one make sense? Okay. So just to make sure, these are the items from the bulletin. Okay, so when you go look in the bulletin, these are the items you're going to see in there. Okay, Stratera?
No.
This dexamphetamine?
Yes.
Who knows?
C4, that's an old drug, which is concerning to me that it's on there, right? Because it's hardly prescribed anymore. Has anybody seen this prescribed? Okay, it's out there, but again, the fact that they're including an old drug on here should give you a little bit of pause of like, well, crap, I guess I probably need to know most of the controlled substances, or at least know where to guess. You know, so what could you guess based on this? Like, there's some like clorazepate. There's some things that are similar to the amate, right? So that's probably the best thing if you don't know the answer. Amphetamine and dexamethylphenidate.
Yes.
Right. What's something else that you notice on here that you may want to pay attention to? Anything sticking out? Brand. So the brand and generic, right? So that's something that you need to know, right? So they may ask you brand, they may ask you generic in the same question, so you've got to know what the brand and generic things are. Other comments, questions about that one? Based on what I'm hearing, you need to practice these. You need to practice the select all that applies. The P2s are not pleased because all of what you had as flex questions are pretty much all select all that apply now. Okay? And they struggle with them. But you've got to get better at this because all the flex questions, you'll probably see some flex questions, the 1, 2, 3, you know what I'm talking about? You remember it vividly. Don't remember the law, but I remember the questions. Okay. So you need to work on select all that apply. Okay. And honestly, I don't know if can one of you tell me if that 9th edition has select all that applies in there? I'll check back with you as you're looking. Okay, here's another one. This is an ordered response. And you'll see that this is an example of according to federal, right? So even if Tennessee does something or your state does something different, you got to disregard it for this question. Okay, and that's the reason that we don't just go through law and ethics with this is the most strict rules, right? Because sometimes you're going to have to pay attention to federal versus state. Excuse me. Okay, so we can't easily order these, so let's just go through and talk about when they would expire.
The bupropion prescription is going to be last because it's the only one that's not scheduled.
Okay. What's this first one?
It's no good anymore.
Okay, so this is one that the answers actually changed since you took law and ethics. So all the CARA legislation that came out federally changed this as far as how long our partial fill is good for. And really this is not that great of an item because you don't know the reason for the partial fill. Okay, so if you're going to consider that this was a pharmacy unable to supply, didn't have enough in stock, then you're right. Raymond, it's got to be 72 hours. It's got to be dispensed to the patient. Right? However, CARA changed some of this stuff. If it's a patient request, prescriber request, partial fill, they now have 30 days to fill the remainder, as long as it doesn't conflict with state laws. Okay? So, and that doesn't matter here, right? Because we're just talking about federal. So federally, depending on what they're wanting, it's either going to be 72 hours or 30 days. That's what I mean. This is not a very good item. But hopefully you would get a little more info than that. If I was going to interpret this, I would probably not go with the pharmacy unable to supply. I would go with standard partial fill patient request. Okay? Questions about that one? It's a little bit confusing. Okay, a phone in emergency oxycodone prescription. Yeah, really, that's a crappy item too. I don't know what they're wanting there. It's either the emergency period or 7 days because you have to have the prescription mailed, the covering prescription. I don't know.
Okay, where would you find the care regulations? Would that be like U.S. code?
Yeah, it's in the code, and I give you it's in your handout. So we'll get there eventually. We mentioned bupropion already. An electronic appraisal line prescription. In 60 days. Okay, so those are your 3 example items. I can't imagine that you're going to have a whole lot of these, but I do think you'll see a few. Okay? I think you're going to see flex, select all that apply, and multiple choice. These are going to be your big ones. So you've done this, PCAT, etc. You've done these tests before. You know what it's like. So don't take anything in with you other than you'll need. I think you need your driver's license, right? Somehow you got to let them know who you are. And I'd leave your phone in the car. Don't take your phone in. You can put it in a locker, but there are horror stories of people voiding their MPJE results because they take a break, go to their locker, check their phone, auto disqualified. Right? Your score is no longer good. And you know as well as I do, you can just look at it and not even think about it. Right? So just leave that thing in your car. Don't take your phone in. You can wear clothes, which is good. It's intimidating, it's stress-inducing, but it's just a room, right? It's just a room. This is how I would prepare. I think you need to devote 50 hours. Okay, that's my. I think if you do this and do it right, then I think that you will pass, and you will pass pretty easily. Okay, doesn't mean you'll have like warm fuzzies when you walk out of there, right? But I think that you'll pass and be in the high 70s or 80s. And the thing is, you got to study right. Right. So if you go through and you read and read and read and read, then again, when you think back to how does learning work, right? Does rereading work? No. Why?
You're not recalling.
You're not recalling. All you're doing is putting more info in your melon, right? However, if you self-test, if you use your study guides, for example, or you do practice items, and you force yourself to think, all right, I remember doing that. If you played a Kahoot, for example, even though you got it wrong, you're going to remember the stuff from the Kahoot because it was self-testing, right? So that's the way that you need to spend your time. So give it a read through, and then work on your study guides and work on committing all that stuff to memory through self-testing. You understand? That makes sense? Okay. And y'all are savvy. You can turn self-testing into rereading very quickly. Right? So if you make, I'll just make flashcards, for example. If all you're doing is, this is the question, this is the answer. So you can turn that into rereading. You've got to force yourself to recall that info. This is how I would divvy it up. So if it's not Tennessee, it's the other state equivalent. Okay? That's how I would spend my time. I would try to give yourself at least a month. I'm not going to tell you that people haven't done it quicker than that because they have. But that's my suggestion. You could do, the rules of the board kind of in Tennessee, for example, lend themselves to there's 17 of them now. Right? There's more than when you were a P2. But those are kind of self-limiting, right? So get through a section and then stop for the night. Or you could do the study guide, the section of the study guide daily. It'd be really nice if you had a buddy to study with, right? Where you can, maybe it's your significant other, maybe it's not, but tell me about this. or ask the question, allow the person that's going to take the MPJE to answer, and then fill in the blanks. And then if the in-person reviews, I think they're probably the best bang for your buck. That's why I started offering one here, because there's not really a good resource for Tennessee. So it's been really cool to do that and see all the students from around other areas that come in here. But Tom Thutt has North Carolina. Peter Curran, I think, is still doing the Kentucky one, but I believe he's now on the Board of Pharmacy, so I'm not sure if he's still doing it or not. But if you need, some of you have already reached out to me with state resources, so if you haven't and you need another state, reach out and I'll try to find it for you. These are things that you can buy or use that you may already have access to, like Access Pharmacy, for example, the Guide to Federal Pharmacy Law. If I was going to spend my money on a resource other than an in-person review, that's where I would spend my money. But then you're still going to have to address the state somehow. Pronto Pass is it's flashcards. You'll get them in the mail. They're really expensive, and you'll feel like, are you serious? But they have like a guarantee. I think they have some sort of guarantee that if you don't pass, you get your money back or something like that. So, but then you get a little bit of state-specific information, but very little. So you're probably gonna, if you get Pronto Pass, you're probably gonna need something else that's state-specific. What else? A BOOD. I probably wouldn't use a BOOD, but I suppose that's the textbook that you, in theory, had access to during law and ethics. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of people that will take comfort in spending money, and I would just don't overspend, because if you get 15 resources and only get a fourth of the way through all of them, there's no guarantee that you're going to pass just because you spent $1,000. Okay, so questions about what to get or resources? Okie doke. Want a break before we get going? I kind of want one. Okay, let's take a break. Come back at 5 till. Does that work? All right, you ready to go? So we'll start making our way through the handout here, and if you have questions along the way, just feel free to stop. Anything you want to talk about before you're going? Bless you. All right. So this falls into that 2% category. So I'm just going to go through a few different things that I think you need to have an idea of when they happened and then what they contributed. Okay, so first one, Pure Food and Drug Act. I put that picture up there. You've seen that a couple times. Most stuff came from plants and animals, right? Most drugs did at that time. So that picture on the previous screen is the Armour cattle stockyard, right? Armour thyroid, for example. So plants and animals. And for that reason, that's where the regulation focused. And it was much more on manufacturing, adulteration, misbranding are the two big things there. We'll go into detail just a little bit more in just a minute. The big one for drugs is 1938, so Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. Right? We've got all kinds of stuff that comes out of that. Durham-Humphrey Amendment, for example. The framework from which we operate now, and this established that drugs have to be safe. And then there are some that are oldies that they haven't hurt anybody yet. We'll just assume they're safe. Right? So that pre-38s are that category of drugs. Durham-Humphrey, this is the Prescription Drug Amendment, is what it's called. So this officially got the OTC versus legend figured out, right? And this is why this is good for pharmacists. This is why we have jobs now from a goods perspective. So what is the legend? When you hear legend drug, what does that mean? Prescription only, right? But this is the legend. The legend. Right, so that's what you see on the manufacturer's bottles, right? For prescription drugs, RX only. 51 also allowed refills in oral or verbal prescriptions. Those are both good things. Tue Apr Harris established efficacy. Remember what happened before this that made us pay more attention to this? Thalidomide, right? So, yep. Focomelia, the CLM, births. Alright, so 62, safety and efficacy required for marketing. It's also where we get the DESI drugs, right? The in-between, they're safe, but we don't know if they work. So then we're going to go back and make sure all these drugs between 38 and 62 actually are effective. I don't know that you would be asked about this, but we do handle some devices as pharmacists, so I think it's probably a good idea to know. There's 3 different classes. Class 1 is the least regulated, Class 3 being the most, like pacemakers. Orphan Drug Act, I think the thing you need to know there is the 200,000, if anything. The next one I don't think the Waxman Hatch, I don't think that you'll be asked about, but that was about drug development and new drug application and speeding up that whole process. Strict Drug Marketing Act, really, there was this black market of drug samples, right, where people would sell, drug reps would sell samples to make some side money, for example. That took care of that. Dietary supplement, we treat them more like foods than we do drugs, right? So, and we talked about claims that can be made on dietary supplements. I don't know if you remember this confusing thing about qualified and unqualified health claims. Just ring a bell? Okay. So, I don't think I have this anywhere else in here. But claims are allowed to be made, and the FDA approves some, and those are the unqualified claims, which seems past backwards, right? The FDA approved ones are unqualified claims. There is a significant scientific agreement that they're effective for that thing. So, for example, folic acid, neural tube defects, right? Calcium, osteoporosis. Those are FDA-supported statements that you'll find on dietary supplements. They're not qualified. The ones that qualified are the ones they are qualified because they require a qualifying statement. And essentially that qualifying statement will say, we don't know if this works or not, but it may do this. Okay? And that's what that qualifier is. That's why it's a qualified health plan. Does that make sense? Okay, so those things are allowed. If they start going, well, we don't treat them like drugs, but if you start making drug claims, then the FDA is going to care, right? And then the FDA will step in. They can require you to recall products, etc. And then Medicare Modernization Act of 2003 gave us Part D. Again, I don't know, I'm trying to hit the highlights of that 2%. Okay, federal law resources. This is the 2 parts of the code that there's a lot of definitions in here. I think most of them make sense. We'll go through the ones I think you need to know. And then the prohibitions are the things that we'll discuss just briefly as well, but they're the things you can't do because in the end they either result in an adulterated or a misbranded product. I know that's a lot. But this is a complete definition of a drug. Most of you got the official compendium, right? Those 3 things that it's got to be listed in. And then the B is important: diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, prevention of disease. And then this is language that you might see as well, the structure function language. These are in different types. We tend to think of them as legend versus OTC, but you can divvy them up a little bit different. Right, so these are just some things to keep in mind. Legend, RX only prescription, those are synonyms. Then you've got these little subclasses that are also going to be, for the most part, prescription, but need to make sure you actually understand what's being asked about the specific type of drug in question. Most often on the MPJE, it's going to be controlled substances. There's your recap of adulteration, misbranding. So adulteration is something's wrong with the tablet, capsule, liquid itself, right? And the filthy, putrid, decomposed, but it doesn't have to be. It's a may statement in there, right? So if you drop something on the floor, if you drop a tablet on the floor, you may have a squeaky clean floor, but it may be adulterated, right? So filthy, putrid, decomposed. That's your adulteration language. And then the other one is misbranding, and these are the two words: false or misleading. Okay, it doesn't have to be both. It just has to be one or the other. It could be both, but it's something to do with the label or the labeling primarily. So not specific to the tablet, capsule, liquid, whatever the drug is, but something about the way that that drug is labeled. Okay, and so one of them will commonly lead to the other. Right, so if you have, and you might remember this, if you have a sterile product that is filthy, putrid, decomposed, then, or it's non-sterile, right, that would be adulterated, right? And then think about a bag at normal saline. What's the normal saline going to say on the bag? It's going to say sterile, right? But it's not. So your adulteration led to misbranding. You with me there? Okay. It usually goes that direction. There might be a situation where you can do misbranding to adulterate it, but usually it's adulteration leads to misbranding. Keep thinking you have a question, but you're just holding up your... I do that a lot. Just holding my hair up. Yep. Okay, label. We talked about label versus labeling. Back in the day, we'll talk about it again here. So the label is on the immediate container. And again, this is focused mainly at manufacturers, right? So you're going to see info in here that's talking about the bottle that arrives at a pharmacy that the drug is in there. Okay, and this is important because this is what allows you to put a label on a prescription, but not include all the other stuff that the manufacturer is required to put on there. Okay, so we talked earlier about name of drug, right? That was missing. Here you go. This is stuff federally that has to be on prescription label. Name, address, the dispenser, so the pharmacy, serial number, which is what? Prescription number. Date of the prescription or of its filling. That's confusing a little bit, right? Name of the prescriber, and if stated, name of the patient, directions for use, cautionary statement. So you don't see drug on there, right? A little funky, but that's the way it was written. And actually, the patient's name's not on there, name isn't on there, you don't have to put it on there, right? Which just seems weird, right? But federally, that's the way. And if stated, the patient's name and directions and cautionary statements. So the labeling includes the label and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So the best way to think about this is the labeling would include the prescription, the information on the prescription label, okay, and all that other stuff you have to give. So we talked about med guides, right? That would be considered labeling. patient package insert. When do you give those to patients? Patient package insert. Remember? Birth control, right? So that would be considered labeling, right? And then this is where we get into misbranding. So if you're required to give that by law and you don't, you then don't have all of the labeling, and therefore it's misbranding. Okay? It's not adulterated, but it's misbranding. So I would not be surprised if you have some sort of question, maybe more than one, on the MPJE that asks you about this happens, that's a hypothetical, does this result in misbranding, adulteration, both, neither? Okay, I think that's a legit type of question. All right, let's go through these types of labeling. So the package insert is targeted at you, targeted at physicians, right? Targeted at health professionals. You can give it to the patient, all right, but that's not who it's written for whom it's written. I think that's why I'm supposed to say that. You've seen all kinds of these. You know there's required info in there. The FDA requires it. You just can't make a package insert and not get it FDA approved or follow the directions. Patient package insert are your oral contraceptives. Outpatient, it's every dispensing. Okay, so if you, and most of the time, the way that it's packaged does this for you, right? So it will be in the little wrapper, right? So it's taken care of. So if you dispense 3 packs, then you have 3 patient package inserts that are going out the door with it, right? So that's the requirement. And then if it's inpatient, institutions, like, so it's initially and then every 30 days is the way that you would treat that.
What is that? Isn't that the same as like every pill though? Because you get it every 30 days anyway? Or like every dispensing?
Yeah, but the way the wording is for institutions, it specifically says 30 days. So okay. I think you could probably argue like 20. You probably give them 28 days. Oh, yeah. Most of the packs are 28 days, right? So 30 days is what it says. Okay, med guides we've talked about in the Kahoot, but these are the 3 things that are considered when trying to figure out if we need a med guide for this or not. Okay, and I mentioned this in law probably, but like this to me seems like every drug, but I don't know. There's about 300 of them. I think there's more than 300 now that have med guides. There's a lot of them that are commonly dispensed that have a med guide. So if it's required, then there are required contents according to the FDA, and then that's one that's with every dispensing. So new and refill prescription. So common ones you see in practice: anticoagulants, NSAIDs, have a med guide.
Psych meds, seizure meds.
Seizure, yeah, a lot of them have it, right? You can go online and get the list, but I don't necessarily know that you need to know which drugs require a med guide. You just need to know what to do with them from a legal perspective if they are required. This is the stuff that's probably over-given, over-dispensed, but every new prescription, you have to give the consumer medical information and consumer medication information. And you probably give it every time because it just prints out. Right? But don't answer every time on the MPJE. They don't care what prints out. They care what it says in the law. Dr. Dillard, the other day when he was here, he was talking about board. I think it was who he was, Kay and Audrey. Wasn't he talking about when he was hiring board investigators, Dr. Dillard? But one of the questions that he asked is, a patient is out of a medication, for example, they're going to be gone 10 days. What are you going to do as the pharmacist? And he wants to see if they're going to provide patient care, the best thing that in the best interest of the patient, regardless of the rules. It's all fine and dandy, but don't think that way on the MPJE. Right? You got to go with the rules. So he was looking for an answer of, I'll just give 10 days, right? Because that's what's in the best interest of the patient. No. Like, from the MPJE's perspective, they don't care about patient care. Right? You got to go with what is the law. I know that sounds silly, but that's true. You don't want to think about. Don't use professional judgment on the MPJE. It's very answer 72 hours. Okay, and then the far end. So you've got consumer medical or medication information, and you've got the REMS programs, right, for your extended release opioids, Clozaril, lots of different things have REMS, where there are specific hoops you have to jump through, right? Accutane's one. There's hoops you got to jump through. Clozaril, pretty good hoops you got to jump through. Some of them may not be that in depth, or may not require anything else on your end before you dispense, but it may be like a training program that the physician has to go to or through, etc. So those are REMS, though. So importantly, REMS may also require these things, right? So a REMS program, one piece of that may be a med guide. Another piece may be a training, etc.
Do you think the requirements for each drug would be on this MPJE?
I'm sorry?
Do you think the requirements for each drug could be on the MPJE, or is it just knowing
No.
the basic concept of REMS?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to ask drug specific. They're not going to ask you, like, what are the steps to get a Clozaril prescription.
Okay.
No. But they'll just want you to know what REMS are. Yep. All right, here's some little potpourri for you. We're going to switch topics about every slide, I would assume. So we talked about this in the Kahoot. Drug recalls, class 1, most serious, class 3 least. Right? I think you need to know that. I have no idea if you need to know this or not, but old habits die hard, and so this thing's still around. So I think it's probably a good idea to know what these things mean in general, and then which one is a contraindication. Right? So D contraindicated? No. X. Yep. Yeah. So then that's the old. Let's shoot. And then this is the new. Just the categories. I have a hard time figuring out what they would ask you on this, but I don't know. There it is. Maybe they would ask you the components. I don't know. I think it's tough to make a good question out of that new approach. This is the NDC number, what those numbers mean. It's actually not a requirement. It's on most stuff because it's the way that it's billed, right, with the barcode technology, and it's actually not required. And then there's 3 different parts to the NDC number. Sometimes you'll see these numbers missing. Right? If they're missing, you just assume they're zeros. I don't think you'll be asked about this, but just for completion's sake, just what the trials mean with the FDA. And then the 4 that are FDA recognized. All right, something that people get mixed up is Anti-Tampering and Poison Prevention Packaging Act. Okay? You learned about both, but they've got different purposes, right? So the anti-tampering is to keep somebody that has that wants to harm someone from doing that without you having a good idea that something's been done, right? So this is the 82 one where somebody took Tylenol off the shelf, adulterated it, and people died. Right? They adulterated it, put it back on the shelf, somebody else purchased it. So the goal with this is to have tamper-evident labeling. So if somebody's been jacking around with an OTC product, you should know that based on the tamper-evident features. So these are all, there'll be a little message on there, right, that tells you what the tamper-evident features are. Make sense? Okay. Poison Prevention Packaging Act is, what's the intent of that?
Prevent poisonings from household substances.
Prevent poisonings from household substances, right? So this is mainly about children, right? So anti-tampering, probably more adult focused because they're the ones that are going to be purchasing the consumer products. Poison Prevention Packaging, kid focused. We'll get there in a minute. Orange Book. I think you need to know what the codes mean, right? So the A codes, there's no problems. B, there are problems. AB, we've resolved the problems, but you need to pay attention to the numbers that come after it. Okay, so if you go in the Orange Book and you look around, you will see there are some branded products where there's more than one type of brand. Okay, so a good example of this is diltiazem. Okay, so you've got some that would be generic for Cardizem CD. Okay, and then some for Tyzac, I think was the other branded product, right? But they're not the same. They're both diltiazem, but they're different. So what you'll see is you'll have all the generics that are bioequivalent. I don't remember which one's which, but you'll have the ones that are bioequivalent to Cardizem CD with an AB1, and then you'll have the ones that are bioequivalent with Tyzac as AB2. So if you get a prescription for Cardizem CD and generic, you can't substitute these, right? Because they're not bioequivalent. You have to substitute the ones that are AB1s. Your computer will typically do this for you, right? But I think you need to know what that stuff means. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. I think this is something else that you need to know. So B-rated drugs, not bioequivalent. Can you substitute them? Federally. We're talking federally here.
No. B?
B. What do you think?
Yeah.
You actually are not prohibited from doing it. It's a professional judgment issue. Right? So if you want to substitute a B-rated product federally, you're allowed to do so. But pay attention to your state, because your state probably will have something to say about it as well. Legend drug samples, so prescription samples. We talked about this just briefly when I introduced it, but pharmacies should not have samples there, with an exception that if it's a pharmacy in a healthcare entity, so say it's like a pharmacy in a clinic where there are prescribers, and in that case, with written permission from the prescribers, the pharmacy is going to serve as the samples closet. Okay? Which is probably a smart thing. So you've got a pharmacy there, keep the drugs with the drugs. But that's allowed. But in general, your CVS, Walgreens, etc. should not have drug samples there. Hospitals can. You can get inspected. You know this, and they have permission to do that. Okay, Poison Prevention Packaging Act. This is under the Consumer Product Safety Commission. A little different. It's the only one we're going to talk about that's under that. And this is intended to prevent accidental poisonings in children under age 5. I thought I showed you videos of the kids during class, right? Where I did my own little experiment at home, right? To see, can you get in this thing? And they can't. So they're not child-proof. They are child-resistant, right? So some kids could get in there. And there are cutoffs for that. I don't think you need to know the cutoffs. You do need to know to which drugs this applies. And there's a couple different levels here. I think you need to make sure you understand. So, Poison Prevention Packaging Act is specific to certain types of drugs, right? So, these completely disregarded in here. This does not apply to this, okay? And then, so that's one level. Is it an injectable drug? If yes, then this doesn't matter. Okay? If no, go to the next step. Okay? And then from there you have two different things you need to pay attention to. The exemptions and the waivers. Okay? So the exemptions are for drugs that we don't want them to be in child-resistant containers, or we're exempting them, the Consumer Product Safety Commission is exempting them because they don't think they're going to do harm if a child would get them and take them all. Okay? You with me there? The waivers are on the patient or prescriber end, where that's where you think about your elderly patient that has trouble getting into a child-resistant container. This is what allows the child the easy off lids. Okay? So, two exemptions, no safety concern. So you can think about these. There's all kinds of things that are exempted here. The hormonal contraceptives, for example, they may be hard to get out of the container, but they are not, they're exempted, right? What else? You can get small packages of ibuprofen, of Tylenol. You often see them in gas stations, for example, that are just the RIP packs, right? That's a small enough quantity that they're exempted here. Okay? If you put them in a bigger quantity, they're not going to be exempt. Right? So there's all kinds of them. And then the best example of the must be readily available is the sublingual nitroglycerin, nitrostat. Questions about those? Dose packs, those are other good examples. There's all kinds of them. So if I would take one, I'd go look one time. Just go look through this list and see what's on there, and I think that'll be good enough once you understand the concept of what an exemption means. So is it clear that there are kind of two levels? Right? There's some, this thing doesn't even matter, and then there's another level where it does matter for this type of drug, but we're going to exempt them anyway. Make sense? Okay. I'm not getting a whole lot of head bobs. I'm having a hard time telling if I'm good. Okay, the waivers. Pharmacists are not allowed to do this. Pharmacists cannot waive. We're just we do what we're told, essentially, according to the law. So a prescriber can, one by one, right? So if the prescriber said, fill all of Miss Smith's Lipitor with easy off containers, or easy open containers. So that would apply to that. That waiver would work for that fill and the refills. Okay? But the prescriber can't say, fill all of Miss Smith's drugs in easy open containers. Okay, that's the patient's call. They can do that if they want, but the prescriber can't do that. Okay, so the patient can say, yeah, I want every other one done in easy open. They can say whatever they want, right? And you're supposed to comply with that. So they can also have a blanket waiver where they say fill all of them in easy open containers. There's nothing in federal law that says you have to have signed documentation about this. Okay, can you? Sure. Right? It's probably a good idea. I don't think you'd have to do a proof gallon, but y'all remember how to do this? No. All right. Well, that's how you do it. It's not. I don't think that they would do that, but that's the way that. In the same way that we inventory controlled substances, when you inventory alcohol. Have you seen alcohol in a pharmacy? Yeah, I mean it's there, usually used for compounding or something, but you would report your inventory in proof gallons like this. I don't remember what I put on the handout. Can I go on? We good? Okay. Advertising, the FDA cares about both, but they don't necessarily regulate both. Okay, so they do regulate legend drugs. The Federal Trade Commission regulates OTCs, but then if the companies start doing stuff they're not following the rules, then the FDA will step in and they will care. So the example, well, Katie and Audrey just talked about this in law and ethics. What was the go-to example of this, of where the FDA stepped in? Remember? Yeah. She saved me. Yeah. I have no idea. So Listerine, right? Fill us in.
Listerine was advertised to be for common cold, and the FDA stepped in and said you have to redo advertising and say this product will not help with common cold, reduce symptoms, all that stuff. So it basically gave corrective advertising statements that were required by the manufacturer. So if you overstep your indications or what you're allowed to, what that drug is indicated for, from an OTC perspective, that's when the FDA will care. And then they'll make you correct that language. Okay, this is the minimum requirements for OTC labeling. So again, this is on the package, it's coming from the manufacturer right to the pharmacy. This is not anything you're doing to an OTC product. And then the drug facts panel has specific requirements as well. And we're done with that part. That's a lot of different stuff. Questions? It's really engaging, isn't it? Yeah, that's awesome. Just think you only have like 50 hours that you have to spend doing this. You ready to keep going? All right. Did I put the links on there? Yeah, okay. I
I don't think that you'd have to hang out at those links, but I think you'll. I think you have what you need. I'm trying to think. I want to make sure I say that right. As I'm going through here, I may change my mind, but I would read this one time through. I think this is going to interpret a lot of it for you. So the DEA Pharmacist Manual. It's freely available online. I don't know that it's updated to reflect CARA and things like that. But there are definitions in here that I think you're gonna need to know how to use them. Practitioner is a good example. Individual practitioner, institutional practitioner. They're different things, right? And they can mean different things depending on if you're in the code, U.S. code, or the Code of Federal Regulations. So that's a little bit annoying, but that's the way that it is. We'll go through a few of these here. So dispenser, a little different depending on where you're at. In the U.S. code, a dispenser is a pharmacy. Okay? And then in the CFR, a dispenser is a pharmacy or pharmacist, right? So you need to pay attention to where you're hanging out. And then the dispenser re-registers with the DEA every 3 years. Okay, so typically that's the pharmacy, right? Because the pharmacy registers as a dispenser / instructor. We'll go through the types of registration here. For controlled substances, this is what the United States Code says about the factors that are considered. This is typically what's going to be considered in the state where you practice as well. However, you might want to check just to make sure. Most states will just take this verbatim, but they may add something else. So you might want to check that out. But those are the 8 things we're going to look at. We're trying to figure out, does this need to be a controlled substance or not? Okay, let's go through these schedules real quick. So C1s, you should not see in pharmacies, right? There's no accepted medical use for them. There might be like researchers that could get C1s to conduct research on them, but you should not see those. Something I highlighted marijuana, just because federally it's a C1, but your state may call it something different. So you want to make sure. C2s, they have an accepted medical use, right? High abuse potential, and then I think you need to know the language is severe psychological or physical dependence. Examples, I highlighted cocaine because it's one people get wrong. Cocaine, you think illicit, and you think C1, but it's a C2, it's got a medical use. So you know as well as I do, that's not an exhaustive list of C2s, right? So I'm just giving you some fast movers, things you might, some different types of names that you might see with like the barbitals, for example. They're going to be here, they're going to be in C4. Well, sort of. I'll tell you why here. If you put it in a suppository form, less abusable apparently. So secobarbital in a suppository form, C3. Secobarbital in another form, C2. Okay? Anabolic steroids hang out here, and Tylenol 3 hangs out here. I think this is probably something you need to know. Just the cutoff of what would be considered a Schedule 3 versus 2. Okay, so Tylenol 3 has how much of each ingredient in it? 300 milligrams of acetaminophen. 30 milligrams of codeine. So, you can actually go up to 90 milligrams in a tablet and still be considered a C3. Okay? So actually the bar is higher than Tylenol 3. Does that make sense? Okay. So codeine 30 milligrams by itself would be what? C2. Same codeine 30 milligrams with some acetaminophen is a C3. Right. C4 is low potential for abuse. The benzodiazepines hang out here. You've got some diet pills like phentermine here, sedatives, hypnotics, carisoprodol and tramadol also hang out in here. There's a lot of other ones too, but those are just some examples. And then C5s have low abuse potential relative to the C4s. And then there's limited dependency. You've got lower levels of the codeine combinations like Cheritesset AC, the guaifenesin with codeine. You've got your Lomotil, Lyrica. And then this is your cutoff for Cheritesset AC, or the guaifenesin with codeine. So you've got 2 milligrams per mil. If you go look in the code, it's going to say 200 milligrams per 100. Right? So 2 milligrams per mil is your max. If you go above that, say you made that one that was 3 milligrams per mil, 5 milligrams per mil, where's that going to live? It's going to go up to C3, right? Where the Tylenol 3 is. Yep. So guaifenesin with codeine, the kind that's on the market, is at the max dose allowed for a C5, 2 milligrams per mil. Questions about that? Okay. So where do you start with all this? I think your best thing is to look at, you can use online resources, figure out, all right, what are the most commonly prescribed controlled substances? I think that's a good place to start. You may get one out of left field, and if you do, just do your best to put it in the right category based on the letters that are in that word. I think that's your best bet. I do think you need to know brands and generics. The thing about these, and it's the same with when you took exams in law and ethics, is that this is kind of your baseline info, right? That then you'll have to be able to use, and we saw these in the practice items. So you need to know which ones are scheduled, which schedule they in, and then based on that, what laws apply, right? As far as refills, partial fills, etc. So this is stuff that you need to know, and to be able to use it in several items. That's my hunch. Obviously, I don't know that, but based on doing this for 8 years, I think that's pretty good, pretty safe bet. Spencer.
Which schedule do you think has just like the most in case all else fails and we just want to guess?
Probably 4 is where I would guess. There's a lot of different stuff in there with the diet, the phentermines. You've got like phenobarbital, clorazepate. You just got a lot of random stuff that's in there. All the benzos. There's tons of OLAMs and APAMs. So that's probably the one, if I had to guess, unless it ends in "-one", right? Or "-ene". Like if it's a hydrocodone, oxycodone, something, odone, or like morphine, then I'm not going to guess 4 because none of those hang out in 4. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's how I would think about it. Your tramadol is there, but then your tapentadol is where? 2. That's a little bit confusing. So it doesn't always work. They just go, oh, it's an all. 4 or 2. You got. But overall, I think you'll get close paying attention to the names. You want to work here? We'll test some here. Coding alone.
2.
Dose. Secobarbital, non-suppository.
3.
3.
4.
3.
What's Lunesta used for? Sleep. All right, sedative, hypnotic. So when in doubt, guess 4.
5.
5.
2. 3.
Sorry, I'm getting out of line here, but
3.
codeine 2 milligrams per mil.
3.
Okay. Where's gabapentin?
5. Really nowhere.
Federally nowhere. That's right. Federally not scheduled. Right? That's one. That's one you're going to have to look up your states because it's kind of a mixed bag. Gabapentin.
Would that be on the Tennessee MPJE since it just happened July 1?
Probably. I don't know. I don't think that it would be on there from the recent change. However, I just wonder if it might be on there and they just changed the right answer. Right? Because some of the stuff you could just change. It is now, but it wasn't. And they've tried. Maybe they had that item on there as an example of when you have to, like, when you select all that apply that are C2s. I think that there's a good chance you might see a gabapentin on it, just because it's been a little bit controversial, and they can go in and say, yeah, it's.
And with all the stuff about like partial filling, do you think that new Tennessee Together Act that also went into effect
No.
on July 1, you don't think that'll be on there?
Well, and so, can we hold on that?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about that in the Tennessee part. Okay, there's 10 different types of federal registration. Pharmacies register as dispenser instructors. Right, so do physicians. That's the most common type of registration for the folks you're going to be interacting with. And then you've got your manufacturers like Pfizer. You've got your distributors like Cardinal Health. You've got reverse distributors. It could also be Cardinal Health, right? That they would register as both if they're going to do that. You've got your researchers. You have your narcotic treatment programs. That's like, another word for that is opioid treatment program, which is another word for that is methadone clinic. Okay, those are all the same thing. They have their own registration. Importers, exporters, and this is all fancy stuff. You don't need to know that. All right, that's a lot of words. This is the 5% rule. Just ring a bell? Nope. Okay, so you don't, as a dispenser, you don't want to have to register as a distributor. Right? So what the DEA allows is they allow you to distribute a little bit, but if you do too much, then you have to register as a distributor, which means you have a whole other set of regulations you have to pay attention to, which you don't want to do unless you're like a Cardinal Health. Right? So they allow you to distribute up to 5% of what you dispense. Okay? And that's a lot, because you read it, it's 5% of the total number of dosage units of all controlled substances distributed and dispensed. Okay? So that's a lot. So that's every hydrocodone, every one. So you can dispense, or you can distribute up to 5% of what you dispense plus distribute. Does that make sense? No 5%. Okay? Maybe this might be a place you have to do some math. I don't know. Maybe they give you a scenario where this number of tablets has been distributed and dispensed in the calendar year. How much can be distributed? What's the max amount that could be distributed according to federal regulations? And then you've got to know 5% of that. Okay? I don't know. I'm just trying to give you a hypothetical that might be on there. But I do think that this is a question you could be asked in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so this is just giving an example. So if you distribute beyond the 5%, you can't keep your drugs interspersed with the non-controls. For example, from a storage perspective, you now have to accumulate everything in a safety cabinet, otherwise known as a safe, and not just your regular safe, a big old honking safe. Okay, so there's different requirements for distributors. You don't want to have to pay attention to those. So the 5% rule is where you want to hang out below it. There's two things that drive the type of registration, and you'll notice that the quantity is not one of them. Okay, they want to know the schedules that you're going to handle, and then what are you going to do with them, right? So that's what the DEA cares about. So you would register as a dispenser, and then this is what it would look like on your 222, for example, which is a good place you'd find it. You'd see 2, 2N, 3, 3N, 4, 5 usually, or something like that. And I don't know why it's like that. I think it's just because it's the way it's always been. The N stands for narcotic, but that's the way you would typically be registered. Now, federally, you don't have to register like that. If all you're going to handle is C2s, then you can just register to handle C2s. Okay, that's not the norm. Most people, if they're going to handle or dispense controlled substances, they dispense 2s through 5s, right? So that's the way a normal pharmacy would register. And then you know this, but every pharmacy, every site has to register individually. So this is the way that it, I don't necessarily know that you would be asked this, but this is the way this process works. I guess you could be asked some of this. So you let the DEA know that, hey, I'm going to buy this pharmacy, for example, and all the drugs that are in it. Okay, you got to let them know 14 days ahead. If you hear nothing, you're good to go, which seems a little weird when you're dealing with the DEA, right? I'd like a permission slip or something, but that's not the way it's worded. So if you don't hear anything, you're good to go. You got to do it 14 days ahead. You have to do an inventory, right? And then any of the C2s that transfer ownership get transferred via a Form 222. Right, so that could be a decent number of forms. You can order up to 10 on one, but you may have a lot on there. But it's transferring 222s. Got to have transferring C2s. You got to have a 222. And then the records change hands too. So you need to be able to account for your inventory, right? So when the DA comes in or the board investigator comes in, they want to know how much inventory you have and what substantiates you have in that inventory, so records are going to change hands from that owner to the next owner and then be kept for how long?
10 years. 3 years.
2 years.
2 years. When in doubt, guess 2 years. Jeff.
Well, Kristen had her hand up first.
Oh, sorry. Kristen.
If you inherit a pharmacy, do you have to?
You're really lucky.
And that was like,
Well, or else you just lost. I don't know. Depending on how you look at it.
I mean, if it's your family's pharmacy and
Yeah.
then you become the owner, which is that?
I think it would depend. I don't think the answer is really clear. It depends on. It'd probably be state specific, and then as far as this is concerned, you probably wouldn't have to do that because it's not. There's probably ways to do it that it's a different. The transfer of ownership would look different, perhaps. I don't know, but you'd have to check with your state because the rules of the board in Tennessee specifically state if this happens, then you have to get a new license, for example. But the DEA, here's an example and why I don't know what would happen. So the CVS, where I was the pharmacist in charge, a lot of the mail that we received still said CVS Pharmacy, DBA, Revco. Okay, because they had bought out a Revco, and they were still doing business as Revco. So I'm not sure what that transfer of ownership looked like in there. And we were still using, actually, the DEA number from when it was a Hooks. So the Hooks DEA had been transferred to the Revco, been transferred to the CVS as they were bought out. So, I don't know. Sorry. Was that your question too? Suppose you inherit a pharmacy.
When you do the 222 form, is the old owner the distributor?
Yeah, so the old one would be the supplier. Yep. Yep. You know this now, right? I want to get caught. I don't think you're going to have questions on the. We didn't really cover this in law, but the different letters that are the initial letter mean different things. I think you know that, but like there are different letters for distributors, for those different types of registrants. But I don't think you need to know that. I think if you're going to be asked anything about a DEA, it's going to be, is it a valid DEA according to the numbers? Okay. And that second letter, I don't even know what they could ask you about that, because it doesn't always match up with what it's supposed to match up to, because people get married, names of, my CVS was AH, right, which makes no sense because CVS starts with C, right? It ought to be a C, but it's an H. So those things change, and I don't think you're going to see anything about that on the MPJE. You want to practice one, or you got it? I'm not hearing anything. Let's move on. I think this is something you need to know, that as the registrant, so as the pharmacy, for example, you can't employ anyone who's been convicted of a felony offense with controlled substances. Okay, so hiring technicians. Pharmacists should take care of itself, because this is something that's going to be reported to the board, right, when you're seeking licensure. And then if it's something after licensure, then they're probably not going to be licensed anymore, right? So, but for technicians, for example, this could matter. All right, how do you store drugs in a pharmacy? So this is substantially constructed locked cabinet. That would be what we would call a safe. Or you can disperse it with the regular drugs, right? And so people get confused about this, and you've probably seen a little bit of everything. You can use both. You can have everything interspersed, right, including all your C2s. That may give some of you the heebie-jeebies, but you could do that, right? And I've worked at a couple pharmacies where that was the case. We didn't really keep anything in the safe. So, questions about that? Or you can use the combo pack, right? You can do both. Doesn't make any sense, but it's not something you would see, but you could keep all your C5s in the safe and all your C2s interspersed. Right? I know, but I'm trying to give you, don't get caught up on what makes sense and what doesn't on the MPJE. You got to think about, what does it say? So you can keep C2s through 5s either in a safe or interspersed to prevent theft, diversion, or a little bit of both.
This may not matter for the MPJE, but for your anecdote, a couple places that just kept their C2s mixed in, did you have to report a lot of loss at that place?
No, we didn't. But I think it also kind of predated a lot of the opioid diversion and theft. So no, we didn't. But it was also a small independent pharmacy where, we didn't have a whole lot of people back there. But that's where I got robbed. Where it was very easy. I didn't have to go to the safe. I just went and put it off the O counter. Right? They got all the OxyContin. They got the Ogen. They got everything that was on that shelf. And I think that was before Opana. I'm old, dude. Sorry. I don't remember what else would have been on that shelf. I know we did get some hormones, though. Okay, just a couple things. You don't want to be involved in drug trafficking. Okay, I think you know that. But if you dispense in a haphazard manner, that's what it says. It's considered drug trafficking. Drug trafficking is that equals jail time. So don't do that. And then there's also kind of a catch-all. If it doesn't follow this, it's unlawful. So, for example, if you don't keep your records, if you don't complete your prescriptions, etc. And this is a pretty big deal now. So you just need to make sure that you're doing all this stuff. That you're putting addresses, for example, on your controlled substance prescriptions, things like that. Okay, I think this is clear, but just to show you the way this would work. You're going to keep all the copy 3s. Right? 1 and 2 go to the supplier, and then 2 ends up at the DEA office. Now, that's the norm. What if, let's do another hypothetical, because you don't want to always assume that copy 3 is at the pharmacy, because what if another registrant in your town, say a physician's office, wants to purchase some hydrocodone, okay, from you, then what role are you going to play as the pharmacy? You're going to be the supplier. So then which one would you end up keeping in your possession? Number 1. Right. So you've got to be able to walk through this purchaser, supplier, and not think that the pharmacy is always going to be the purchaser, because it's not always the case. Right? Or maybe you're selling to another registrant that's a pharmacy. Right? That happens. We did this with the health system, the hospital in town sometimes, where they need to buy something that they didn't have any of, so we would, you have to use a 222 if it's a C2. That make sense?
So when you're transferring ownership, the first owner gets copy 1, and then they have to send it to the DEA, and then the new owner keeps copy 3.
Yep. Yep.
Double checking that.
Yeah.
A little weird.
Yep.
Will they ask about page color?
No. I sure hope not.
Me too.
Yeah. I don't think so. All right, we're gonna spend a decent amount of time in 1306 here. Let's take a short break. Is that all right with you? Take like 7 minutes. Come back at 4:15. If that works. Yeah, we're gonna hang out with me in the fall. Where's Okay, we're gonna go through the CFR here. So 21 CFR 1306 is your like nuts and bolts of C2, 3, 4, and 5 prescribing and dispensing. Okay, so we hung out a lot here in law and ethics back in the day. So we're going to go through all these sections individually, and this is a really important part for studying for the MPJE. You need to know this well. So the 130603 talks about issuing prescriptions. And issuing is the giving of permission for the prescription to exist. Okay, so that has to be done by a practitioner, but federally that is not, there's no list of who can be that, who's considered a practitioner. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go to your state, wherever you're going to practice, to figure out who's authorized to prescribe. Okay? So the practitioners issue, and that is really the prescribing, right? So, but it may be like a nurse that calls in, or some agent of the issuer or the practitioner, right? But ultimately, the practitioner is the one that has to issue or grant permission for that to exist. And practitioners either have to be registered, so they'll have their own DEA number, or exempt. And the best example of the exemption is, and we discussed this too, in a health system or a hospital setting where you have medical residents, for example, that are practicing in a hospital. They will use the hospital's DEA, and then they'll have a code after that DEA number that identifies that individual resident. Okay, so that's allowed, and that's considered an exemption from having your own DEA. That works fine in the hospital, but once you leave that area, so say for example a resident was, or a fellow, or it really could be anybody in the health system. If there's a hospitalist, they don't necessarily have to have their own DEA. They can use the hospital's DEA as long as their scope is in that hospital, right? But if that person goes and moonlights somewhere at an urgent care clinic, do they have to have their own DEA for that? Yes, they do, right? So it's got to be within the scope if it's going to be an exemption. All right, this is, you've seen this multiple times, I'm sure, with corresponding responsibility. But so practitioners issue, for what purpose can they issue? It's got to be a legitimate medical purpose within the usual course of practice. Those are the two things that are requirements. And then there's a statement in there that most pharmacists know. It's about the corresponding responsibility, right? That it says that the responsibility lies on the practitioner, but there's a corresponding responsibility on the pharmacist to ensure a legitimate medical purpose, usual course of practice. So you have responsibility as well. Language in here about issuing prescriptions for general office use. So that can't happen. It's stated explicitly here. So how do you get around that? So prescriber's office, physician's office, needs some, they need some Ativan. Okay? How are they going to do that if they can't do this? Somebody? Who said so? Drew would say? You could do the patient's name, right? And then you're issuing it as long as it's legitimate medical purpose, usual course of practice. Say they want a bottle of 1,000.
The patient?
No, sorry, the physician's office. Physician's office calls you. They're a registrant, right? I would like 1,000 Ativan for in-office procedures.
They order it from the supplier?
They can. You can also sell it to them, right?
And you
As
become
long
the
as-
supplier?
Huh?
And you become the supplier?
Well, you'd be the supplier, but like Ativan, what schedule is it? 4. So we don't need the 222, right? So you can just sell it to them. As long as you're below your 5%, you're allowed to do that, right? That's part of your registration as a dispenser instructor. You can distribute a little bit. So if somebody calls, you just sell it to them. You have a record of that transaction. You would have one, they would have one, and you would keep that with your invoices and your other records that are going to substantiate why you have the amount of drug in your pharmacy, right? As you do, they would have a record to indicate why they have theirs, and you're good to go. You don't need a prescription to do that. You just do it as a distribution from being a dispenser. Does that make sense? You don't use a prescription to do that. It's not allowed. Questions about that?
How does that fall under, like, for compound? It does seem like places that work compound for office use, and they usually wind up attaching the patient's name to it. So could we just, like, compound without an order and then sell it to them?
So compounding, well, I mean, you can't with controlled substances, right? But so what if you had a compound that didn't have any controlled substances in it?
Done like a triple cane, like lidocaine, fifteen, lidocaine.
Yeah. So you can do that. You can do that. But once you add the controlled substance ingredient, you can't do that. Okay, 130604 also talks about issuing prescriptions for maintenance or detox. And again, this is where that language matters. So that's really saying you can't normally issue a prescription to treat opioid use disorder. Okay, so you can't normally prescribe hydrocodone, for example, for an opioid use disorder, right? You can't normally prescribe buprenorphine for an opioid use disorder. You've got to get special data waiver, right? So this is saying you can't do this unless you have this data waiver. And then if you have that, there's certain things you can prescribe or you can issue prescriptions for. And only the ones that are FDA approved for that indication. So here's your two different definitions. Maintenance is 21 or more. And the big difference here is you're not trying to get to a drug-free state here. Here you are. Okay, so someone may start out here and then over time transition to this and begin the detoxification process when they might taper methadone or buprenorphine. Okay, so the data waiver allows in-office treatment, right? So this is different from, because prior to the data waiver, if you wanted to be treated maintenance or detox, what were your options? Any idea? You went to the narcotic treatment program, right? Or the methadone clinic. That was your option. It was the only one that was allowed. So the goal with this was to allow prescribers to issue prescriptions for FDA-approved C3, 4, and 5 drugs for maintenance and detox. So the goal was you could treat a use disorder just right alongside any other disease state that you're treating in a primary care setting. That was the goal. So 3s, 4s, and 5s that are FDA approved for maintenance and detox. The only two right now are buprenorphine and buprenorphine naloxone. Okay? So those are your two. Why not methadone?
Can only be prescribed outpatient for pain.
But why?
Because of its varying kinetics.
Well, yeah, you're getting too pharmacy on me. From a law perspective, it specifies 3s, 4s, and 5s. Right? And it's a C what? 2. So, because it's a C2, data waiver doesn't work for that. Okay? So, you can't use methadone. Methadone prescriptions can't be issued for maintenance and detox because they're a C2. Okay? They can be issued for pain. The DEA number with the data waiver is an XDEA. That's what it would look like. And then on a prescription, that is used for, that's issued for maintenance of detox, you need both the regular DEA and the XDEA on that prescription. Questions about that? So as you're going through this, this part, I think it's important to keep in mind the difference between prescribing and dispensing. Prescribe, dispense. The third one is administer, but I think that people tend to get hung up the most on prescribing and dispensing. Right? So data waiver physicians prescribe, narcotic treatment programs or opioid treatment programs dispense. Right? Okay. So this is what the prescription has to have on it. I don't know what makes it easy for you to group them together, but I tend to group them by the prescriber info, the patient info, and then the drug info. And then the date of issue's got to be on there. It's just kind of on its own. Maybe it works better for you to include it with the drug info. But this is the best way for for me to keep all this straight, because you need to be able to recall this stuff. Okay. There's going to be things that just you see in practice, but just aren't on the list. So, date of birth, patient's date of birth, not on the list. Okay, that's a commonly, that's one that people will tend to think, yeah, it's got to be on there. Well, you might put it on there, but it's not something that's required federally to be on the list. You'll notice that there's 11 here, but there's really 12 if it's a written prescription or if it's a faxed prescription, because this also is a requirement, the signature. Questions about?
Is as directed acceptable for being listed as direction? For
Yeah,
use?
I mean, yes, from a legal perspective, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's best practice, but yeah. Probably the one that's left off the most is this, and they don't really, if it's Tylenol, if it's Tylenol number 3, for example, it's just kind of assumed, right? Now, could there be situations where you could mix up a liquid for a tablet? Yeah, but usually you can get there by the SIG, right, by the directions. So this is you don't have to, by law, you should go write tablets on every one of them, but the DEA doesn't really enforce that. I don't think you're going to see that. But the address of the patient, that's one that you need to put on there.
Is this for all outpatient prescriptions?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is not for inpatient. Yep. And the way to keep this straight is inpatients will have medication orders as opposed to issued prescriptions, right? So this whole thing's about issuing prescriptions. So what can you change? This is what the DEA says right now. I'm not sure why this should be moved up to that. Not sure why it looks funny. What's this? Those things you can change, but it's only after consultation and agreement from the prescriber. Address of the patient, you can put on there. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to get any permission to do that. Okay. Anything else? So what's on there? The drug. Okay. Drug's not on there. If you're switching drugs and it's a C2, for example, you got to have a new prescription, right? The way around it, if it's a C3, 4, or 5, is what? Call, right? You're allowed to get a verbal prescription there, so just call, get a new prescription if you have to change the drug. C2s, the DEA is kind of, they made two different things, and then they contradicted each other. So what they've communicated to the board of the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy is use professional judgment. That's what they say. So I have a hard time thinking that they would lower the bar for C2s as compared to C3s, 4s, and 5s. So I would say follow this for C2s as well. Okay, but then you've got to get a real deal script. A verbal is not going to work to change something right for the C2. Okay, a person's entitled to fill prescriptions. So this is language specific to filling prescriptions. So pharmacists can in pharmacies. All right, urgent cares don't fill prescriptions. They dispense. And there's some gray area here of dispensaries. Right, and there's a couple in town that they're really operating as a pharmacy, but they're not registered as a pharmacy. So you might want to pay attention to your board rules in a state where you practice. Tennessee doesn't really, all the board says about it is they don't really like them, but there's not really, it's kind of a loophole, but they're going to be held to the same expectations as far as labeling and things like that. But that's a little bit of a loophole. Physician's office, they dispense too, but they don't fill prescriptions. And then here's our medication orders that are different. All right, they put this smack dab in the middle of this section, and it's a little bit confusing. So this is talking about the whole premise of 130607 is trying to get somebody, trying to bridge care. So they have a substance use disorder like opioid use disorder, and then they need to get treatment. So what is allowed in the process of getting them into a treatment program? That's really what this is focusing on. So this is saying that non-waivered practitioners, so a non-data waivered practitioner can dispense a narcotic controlled substances. They can't prescribe it, but they can dispense it to a patient a day at a time for 3 days. Okay, that's allowed. So this is an example of if the practitioner doesn't have this might be an example where they ask to purchase some from you, right? Because they can't write a prescription for it. Not allowed because it's maintenance and detox, right? They're not data waivered, but they could purchase some from you and then dispense it to the patient a day at a time. You with me there? Okay. All right, now we're going into 130611. Starts talking about C2s specifically. So written, signed prescriptions, but there are some exceptions. We'll talk about those here in just a minute. You are allowed to have telephone prescriptions for C2s only in emergency situations, and we'll talk through that here. There's language in there that's also confusing in 130611 that talks about fax and calling in. So just to give you a feel for what this means, if I'm at the prescriber's office and I have somebody that has, say I'm at Watauga Orthopedics, somebody broken arm, the arm's been set, they're in pain, they need to have their medicine, their opioid pretty quickly. So that Watauga could call the pharmacy and say, hey, I'm sending somebody in. They're going to be bringing in a prescription for this. Could you have it ready for them? Okay? And then the patient will then bring in the hard copy prescription. So this is saying, yeah, you can do that, but you can't really do any. You can't dispense that thing until you have the hard copy prescription, right? You with me? It's not an emergency situation, right? Because you can actually get the hard copy before you dispense it. It's a little bit confusing. All it's saying is, yeah, you can do that for convenience sake, but you still, at the end of the day, have to have your hard copy prescription in your hand before you can dispense a medication. Okay? Now, here's your emergency prescription for a C2. It's got to be all three of these things. So, immediate administration. There isn't an alternative like a C3, 4, 5 that would work. And it's not possible to get the written copy before you dispense it. If those three things, then it's emergency. If it's only two of them, it's not considered an emergency. I think that this is a pretty solid MPJE topic. I think you'll be asked something about, like, would this constitute an emergency, or what are the requirements for issuing an emergency prescription. Okay. The quantity prescribed only for the emergency period. We talked about that in the Kahoot. There's language in there about if somebody's calling in. I've talked to a couple of my buddies that this has happened to. Right? So anybody can call this in. You need to make a reasonable effort to verify that, yeah, this person calling in an emergency prescription is legit. I probably would not do that for someone you don't know, right? Or else do a little verification. And then you've got to have the covering prescription in 7 days. We mentioned the DEA interprets that. It's got to be in the mail on the way to you in 7 days, if that's the case. This was an issue in practice. Annoying. The guy that we had a lot of emergency prescriptions for, he wouldn't remember what he said. Right? He'd call it in, and then the covering prescription would arrive, and it wasn't the same as what he had called in. So then we'd have to go back, Dr. Berger was his name, we'd have to go back to the Berger's office and get, like, this is what you called in, can you write one that matches? And then so the covering prescription has to be identical. And it's supposed to say this, and then you would keep both together, the emergency and the covering. All right, don't read that. I'm just directing you to the E, F, and G. This is another situation where you don't have to have a written, is when the facts can serve as the original, and it can in three different situations, E, F, and G, and we'll talk about those here. So E, you may recall covering this in law and ethics. Schedule II narcotic substance. So what's a narcotic? We really think of it as like opioid. Okay? So morphine or morphine relative. Okay? So would Schedule II narcotic substance, would that be also like methylphenidate? No. Schedule II narcotic for direct administration. And I think this makes sense because you're typically going to be treating pain here, right? So Schedule II narcotic for direct administration via one of those routes, non-oral, right? So this is the one that I don't have a good example of. I didn't do this in practice. I don't know what that situation would be like, unless it was, maybe there's something with a hospice, or somebody's picking something up for direct administration to a patient. I don't know. I never did this, so I don't have a good example for that one. The next two, yes. Resident of a long-term care facility. And you'll see that this does not say narcotic. It just says Schedule II. Right? So would methylphenidate be okay here? It would. Yep. Which makes sense because long-term care facility patients have lots of different disease states, right? You're not just treating pain in that situation. So I think that makes sense. And then here's the one, again, why I have trouble coming up with how's that number one going to work, the E part. But so this is the hospice program. And again, we're back to narcotic. So E narcotic, F not, G narcotic again, because we're back to treating pain and end of life in hospice. Right? And so one thing to notice on here, it doesn't say terminally ill, right? It says hospice. Now, what's the difference in that?
Hospice for the next 6 months.
Hospice is a program, right? That it is someone that's terminally ill, but you can't just go. So not all terminally ill patients. This wouldn't work for them, right? It's got to be someone enrolled in a hospice program, right? So death is imminent. Okay. What do you think of it? Questions about those? I think those are 3 things you need to know. The E, F, and G. Facts can serve as the original. Okay. This is my favorite one. You can't refill C2s. Let's go on. Okay. Issuance of multiple C2 prescriptions. This is a little bit confusing. So you may recall there's a difference between when you issue prescriptions, but multiple prescriptions can be issued, but you can't post date. Okay, specifically says you can't post date. What does post dating mean? Dating it for the future. Right. So I can't write a prescription. If I'm the prescriber, I can't write a prescription today for April 30, and then for the next one, I'm going to write May 30 as the date of issue, because they're not issued that day. They're issued today. Right? So the date of issue has to be today, and then you can write on there, may not be filled until May 30th. That's fine. Okay, that's the way that it should be done. But you can't issue for a future date. And there's no magic number of prescriptions. You just need to know it's the 90 days of therapy. Okay, so same day, total authorized for C2, we're still in the C2s, right, is 90 days of therapy. So that could be 3 prescriptions for 30 days, which is probably the most common one that you would see, right? It could be 90 prescriptions for 1 day. That's not the point. The point is 90 days, you can issue multiple, they have to be dated the date of issue. Got it? Okay. Anything else I want to cover on that? I don't think so. Yep.
So when prescribers write let's say they do like the 3 for 30, if they don't put that date, like do not fill before whatever, just, I mean, because like reading the way that's written, it's required, but if they don't have the different dates of when to fill it, does it, like, I guess, is it technically an invalid prescription, or does that really matter, or?
It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's where the professional judgment's going to come in. So, and you're going to have, this is where you're going to have to piece together some stuff too, because Tennessee is going to tell you got to fill it within strict conformity of law. So to dispense 2 of the 30 days at once, not going to work. So you're going to have other things that are going to give you guardrails to keep you dispensing like every 30 days. But I'll confirm that, but I think that just because that's not on there doesn't mean it's not a valid prescription.
I guess part of what I was wondering is like, who's to say they can't write 6 months worth if there's no dates on them? And
Well,
like, how can you check that? Or
yeah, so they could do that. By law, they're only allowed to do 90 days max. I mean, regardless of what it says on the prescription.
Okay.
Now, could somebody go around that, and could they give a patient, 3 of them? They take these 3 to the pharmacy. They'll keep these other 3 for 3 months down the road. Yeah, they could do that. But the thing that would be a red flag is if all the issue dates are the same, then those really would not be valid prescriptions because they violated that 90-day thing. Okay, so this is where we're going to integrate, we've got to take 1306 plus CARA, and in some ways it seems like it conflicts, but I guess really it doesn't. I struggle with it a little bit, but I'll walk you through that. I think that it actually does not conflict. So with partial filling in 1306.13, it'll tell you that initial partial filling is always allowed. So you can always partial fill a prescription if that is, if it's desired. The problem is what do you do with the rest? Okay? So CARA doesn't really touch, if the pharmacy only has a few, then you have to fill the rest of it within 72 hours. Okay? And they interpret that as it has to be dispensed to the patient within 72 hours. So it's not that you complete the fill and you have it in a waiting bin somewhere to pick up. It's got to be to the patient within that 72-hour window. Okay? So then the patient only wants a few. 1306 would tell you that you can just dispense what they want and cancel the rest. Okay, but then CARA comes alongside that, and this is where there's a little bit of a discrepancy, I think. CARA is going to come alongside that and change things. So, CARA says, Sarah, you asked about where this is.
Thank you.
That's where it is.
Thank you.
Yep. So this is, you can partial fill as long as your state allows it. Okay, so that's step one. You got to make sure that your state doesn't contradict this. Okay, and if it's requested by the patient or the practitioner, you'll see here that it isn't a pharmacy thing, patient or practitioner that wrote the prescription, and then the total quantity dispensed doesn't exceed the total quantity prescribed. It's kind of a duh, right? If all those things hold, it can be filled, it can be partial filled and completed within 30 days of the date of issue. Okay? So you didn't cover that when you took law and ethics. That's new stuff to you.
Is that only for C2s?
Yep. Yep. You've always been able to partial fill C3s, 4s, and 5s. So the intent of this, right, because you weren't allowed to partial fill, you had a lot of, patients weren't incentivized and pharmacies weren't either to partial fill C2, right? Because then the prescription isn't going to be valid. They don't get as much. What if they need more? Right? Then you have a lot of extra C2s hanging out in homes. That's when they're diverted or non-medical use. So the goal is to limit, but allow too, if the patient needs more, they can come back and get the rest of it filled. So that's what we're trying to do here. But it does specifically state, if in the emergency situations, so if it's a phone-in emergency script, there's a 72-hour requirement there. So general request by the patient or prescriber, CARA gives you 30 days. If the pharmacist is unable to fill, 72 hours. Okay? An emergency situation, you've got to complete the fill within 72 hours as well. Make sense? Okay.
How does that go through insurance?
Not very easily.
So it's just like you partial fill it
Yeah.
and charge the insurance for the couple days that they can afford, and then for the next 72 or the rest that they have to pick up in 72 hours, you have to fill it that amount, or do you have to pay it all at once?
Yeah, that's going to be policy specific. So there's nothing in the, you won't have an MPJE question about that because there's nothing, unless it's specific to your state. Like Tennessee doesn't have anything to say about that, and neither does the DEA. But computer systems are struggling with this. Right? Computer systems are not set up to partial fill C2s. So there's some, they've got to get their rear end gear to be able to do this. Okay, there's some partial filling exceptions. You need to keep the language straight here. So we talked about hospice for the fact serving as the original. Now we're talking about terminally ill, so it's not limited to hospice, it's terminally ill, a little broader. So the goal here is you've got people that, the terminally ill, and you've got people that are fragile, I think is a good way to describe it, right? So maybe you don't need to dispense a huge amount. You could do littler amounts, partial fill, and we're going to give them a little bit longer time to be able to partial fill. So the big thing here is you've got 60 days from the date of issue to partial fill. You have to put the language on the prescription, long-term care facility patient, or terminally ill. And then again, you've got your computer issues, being able to track all the fills, the partial fills in your system. This is the labeling for a C2 drug. So this is what's going to be on the prescription label, right, at the point of dispensing. So what's missing here again? Drug name. Still not there. All right? It's weird, but it's just not there. So C2, what's our cautionary statement that we're going to put on there? Yeah, the no transfer thing, right? That's going to be on there. That's a requirement. So just to put them side by side, I think I got a couple of them flip-flop. But it's really the same, right? I mean, you could argue that that top one, the date of issue or fill versus date of fill, is a little different, but okay, so there's some, for patients that are institutionalized, there's some exceptions here. Less than or equal to 7-day supply, and then it's not in the possession of the ultimate user, right? So somebody else is going to administer this to the patient. And then there are institutional safeguards in place, so you can't just have them all over the place. You've got to have them locked up, etc. And then if you can do all these things, then you don't have to label like that. Okay, you don't have to include all that stuff on there. So for institutionalized patients, they're not held to the same standards for labeling. Okay, it makes sense. It's usually on a unit dose. That's the goal. Because how are you going to fill that stuff on that little unit dose package, right? That's why they're doing that. We've already talked about this. It doesn't apply to C5s. To me, that's just like a custom-made MPJE question. Okay, 3, 4. Now we're going to switch gears out of the 2s to the 3, 4s, and 5s. They can be called or faxed in. You don't have to have an original. If it's written or if it's faxed, it does have to be signed. Right? Obviously, the verbal ones or the oral ones don't. This is the part that's a little bit confusing. So, the C5 thing, and it's a little bit interpretation, and I want to show you why I interpret it the way that I do, and I think you should too. So 130622 specifically says 3s and 4s, max of 5 refills, 6 months from the date of issue is the last time you can do anything with that 3s and 4s. Okay? It does not mention 5s at all. So, because they're not addressed, you default to how long is a regular prescription good, right? So that's where you're hanging out. However, this partial fill thing complicates matters. So in the next part, it says you can partial fill 3s, 4s, and 5s as long as no dispensing occurs 6 months from the date of issue. Now, what do you do with that, right? So it's a little messy. I don't know. I think most people would interpret it, unless the state does something to explicitly address it, that C5s don't expire at 6 months. They really expire at a year. But then if you fill something on a C5, if you partial fill, there's no allowed activity 6 months after the date of issue. So it's, I don't know, thoughts? It does sting. Yeah. It's just a gray area. So I hope you don't get any questions about that.
The computer systems have a problem with it too, that they're not set up that way.
Yeah.
They're set up at all, sometimes.
Yeah. We didn't really address C2s, but how long are C2s good? Yeah. Really, they default to a year as well, unless your state says something about it, right? You just kind of wonder what kind of sense of humor they had when they were making all this 1306 section. I have a good idea. Let's leave 2s out, just to make it confusing. All right, here's your labeling for C3s, 4s, and 5s. I think I didn't include. So it's the same, except you've got the difference here is you've got the date of the initial fill. So you have a couple different dates, and the assumption is here that you might have some refills. That's what they're trying to address. So the date of the fill and the date of the initial fill would need to be on there, which you would have on, like if it's the first fill, it's the same thing, right? But if it's a refill, they're saying both the date of the fill and the date of the initial fill need to be on there. And if you look, most computer systems are going to put that stuff on there for you. Okay, so we had the 7-day supply or less for institutionalized patients with the C2s. Here you go up to 34-day supply or less, or 100 dosage units. And if it's less than that, then you don't have to do the same labeling. Transfers, I'm guessing that this is something that's pretty well known. But it's a one-time, so 3s, 4s, and 5s. We're talking about C2s here, right? We're talking about 3s, 4s, and 5s. One-time transfer unless it's a real-time online system or database. So you need to be able to see exactly what's going on at any other location within that real-time online system for it to be considered that. Okay? So your big chains, to my knowledge, I think all have real-time online systems, like CVS does, Walgreens does. Others you want to mention? Okay. So if that's the case, if it's real-time online database, then you can transfer multiple times throughout that system. Right, because it can be tracked. If it's not, then you only have one time. And you can't transfer just one refill, right? You can't say, I just need one refill, leave the other 4 at your pharmacy. That doesn't work. You've got to transfer the whole prescription. This is something, I'll just mention it here with. This says transfers have to be communicated by pharmacists. Specifically says pharmacists. It's interpreted that a pharmacy intern can do that, okay, but a tech can't, okay. But then you're going to have some states, like Tennessee would say certified techs can transfer, okay. They can, but they can't do this, all right, because federal law says it's got to be communicated by pharmacists. So in Tennessee, it's not going to explicitly state certified techs can do transfers except for controlled substances. It's going to say they can do transfers. But then you have to go and find this info and say, well, they can, but they can't do controlled substances. Okay? So look at your state stuff wherever you end up practicing. And this is what all the stuff that your computer system does behind the scenes that you need to know about, which, again, makes sense. That prescription is voided. There's certain stuff that the pharmacy that's receiving it has to put on there, and then stuff that you need for the complete prescription. Okay, this is talking about, this is the guaifenesin with codeine, selling them without a prescription. selling that product without the prescription. So that has to be a pharmacist that authorizes that. That doesn't mean the pharmacist has to be the one that does all the cash register stuff, but authorizing the sale, pharmacist. You're supposed to know the purchaser or see an ID. Okay, so if you know the person, you don't really have to see an ID. And then that's all the information that has to be recorded there. 18-year-old cutoff. And then the 120 every 48, you need to know that. But there's other language in here about opium containing. I don't think you would be asked that because those products aren't available now. But metprobamate is not a commonly prescribed drug anymore, and it's a practice item, right? So this is 240 for opium containing, which doesn't make, you might think that opium is being a smaller amount than codeine, but that's not the case. Electronic transmission of controlled substances is allowed. You all have likely seen that. There are a lot of hoops you got to jump through on the sender and on the receiver end. So not everybody does this yet, but it's going to be more and more common. But it is allowed. And then central filling, we skipped one part in the C2s. And there's two sections in 1306 that are very similar. One's for C2s, one's for 3s, 4s, and 5s, about central fill pharmacies. And the gist of it is, you can use central fill pharmacies to fill controlled substances. That's fine. You got to be able to keep track of the records in between, but it's fine. You can do that. Pharmacies can serve as collectors, right? That's saying as for disposal sites, right? That's what that language is meaning. There's a little bit of ambiguity about, we didn't list collector as one of the 10 types of registrations, but you're supposed to let the DEA know if you are serving as a collector. So I think you would be a dispenser instructor. Hey DEA, I'm going to also collect. I'm going to be a collector. And then there's certain things you have to do. You can't just get your hefty cinch sack and put it in there. You've got to have trash bags that have ID numbers on them, and they call them the inner liner, right? We'd call it a trash bag. All right, we've covered some of this, the destruction. The DEA form is 41. There's only a few forms I think you need. 41, 106, 222. I think those are the three forms you need to know what they're used for. And then the theft or significant loss is the 106. I think that asking, that this is a good question, I think, on the MPJE, and that you just need to know, they're going to want to know quick, right? So immediately or one day, I think, is where the DEA, if something gets stolen, the DEA wants to know about it. So go tell them quickly. When in doubt, guess 2 years, Dylan?
Going back to the DEA Form 106.
Yeah.
If, not that they would necessarily do this, but if we were given the answer choice immediately or within 24 hours, would it be better to just put within 1 day since that's technically the law states?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be really mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think you would get that. You will see some language that says immediately. I think immediately is often interpreted as 1 day or like 1 business day, right? So I don't think they would give you that. But if it's 1, 3, 7, or 10, you're picking 1. Yep. Okay, records 2 years. There's certain things that you can that you need to keep at the practice site. Right? That's the list here at the bottom. So you've got your prescriptions, your inventories, and your executed order forms. So that's like your executed 222s. Those need to be kept at the practice site for 2 years. So when you think about it, anything that an investigator or the DEA would come in and use to reconcile what you have versus what you've dispensed versus what you've ordered. You need all those documents there for 2 years. Okay, that's what they're really trying to get at here. All right, filing, not filling. Filing, you've got a couple different options, and the thing you need to know is the 2s are by themselves, right? And then you can either do the 3s, 4s, and 5s by themselves, and then the non-controls, or you can combine the 3s, 4s, and 5s with the non-controls as long as you can separate them. Okay, as long as you can tell which ones are the controls, which ones are not. And that's where that Red Sea waiver thing came from, where they would stamp all the controls that are in there with the nons with the Red Sea. Okay, the inventory, there's a couple of just highlights here. The day the business opens and when drugs are added as controlled substances. So the way this will work is Tennessee added gabapentin, for example, right? And so they will specify a date on which you need to do an inventory, and from that day on, it's included, and you track it in your inventory. So they'll say like July 1, count up all the gabapentin you have. That's day 1, right? And then track it from there on out. So that's the way it would work. You've got to do them every 2 years, okay, biennially. You can do them more frequently than that, but 2 years is the max amount of time. Sometimes when you would do them, when you have a new pharmacist in charge, you're required to do an inventory. Theft, inventory is required. And the moral of this is don't half-ass an inventory. Right? If you're going to do one, the most recent one is the one that's going to matter to the investigator, the DEA. So when you do one, do it right. So this is what can be estimated and what has to accurately be counted. So C2s, accurately counted. That means you're counting every tablet, milliliter, or whatever it is. And 3s, 4s, and 5s, for the most part, can be estimated. Okay? But then you've got this, it's kind of, again, in my mind, it's a little bit backwards, where if it's more than 1,000, then it has to be counted. Exactly. Okay, so there aren't many manufacturing containers that come with more than 1,000. You'll see 1,000, right? That's probably the max you'll see. But in theory, on the MPJE, if it's more than 1,000, so that's like 1,001 or higher, right? You have to exactly count it. I think what they're trying to do here is like they don't think you're a good estimator when it goes above 1,000, right? I think that's what they're trying to. We don't trust your estimating abilities when there's that many tablets in the bottle. Let's see. Okay, so that's it. Here's my. I already told you this stuff, but if you don't study, you are flirting with disaster. Okay, you've got to put in the time. And it's not just the studying, it's the studying correctly, right? So you've got to do the self-testing stuff. What else? Scores in the 70s are common. So if you have questions as you're preparing, and it's federal or Tennessee related, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you. And I'm confident that you can pass this thing. Okay? Confident. I'm also confident you're going to have to put in some time. Okay. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, this is going to sound really random, but are they going to ask us specifically, like, according to CFR 1306-12?
No.
Okay. So we don't need to know numbers.
According to federal regulations,
Okay.
yeah. What's the fourth word in 1306.24a?
Yep.
Nope.
Regarding the transfers on controls, is it a state law or federal that it has to be filled at like the original pharmacy before it can be transferred?
Yeah, so this is interpretation. And you're going to have to go to your state. There's nothing federal about that, but there are states that have interpreted it. Okay? So, for example, Tennessee doesn't buy into that. There might be stores that do. The gist of it is a prescription is put on hold at a pharmacy. Can it then be transferred to another pharmacy without being filled first at that pharmacy? So some stores are saying yes, it must be filled there first before it's transferred. The Board of Pharmacy in Tennessee has said, no, it's the patient's prescription. That can be sent to the other pharmacy. Fine. Okay? So you need to look at your state for interpretation though. Somebody else. Kristen?
Are there practice exams?
There are practice items in that Guide to Federal Pharmacy Law. And then
Access pharmacy.
Access Pharmacy might, I don't know. The thing you got to be careful with textbooks is textbooks are outdated the minute they're published. Right? And that's why, like the Tennessee Pharmacy Law book, you need to make sure, you need to see whatever state you end up looking at, you need to make sure their stuff's updated. Because if you went to the Tennessee Pharmacy Law book right now that was published here recently, it's wrong. Tennessee Together is not in there. The most recent Tennessee Together revamp isn't in there. There's going to be lots of stuff that you're going to get wrong if you go to that sort of stuff. That's why I think you need to go with the most updated things are going to be the in-person reviews. That's my 2 cents. But I don't know if Tom gives you practice items. I'm not sure. I do some for Tennessee, and they suck. They're hard.
He did say you only need a pencil and a highlighter, so I'm assuming he will give us that.
Okay. Other questions? All you non-Tennesseans can head out. And we will, if you're doing Tennessee, let's stay and go through real quick to cover what you need to cover. Okay, I'm sitting around 2 different documents, same as federal, only they say Tennessee on them. Otherwise, they look exactly the same. One is the handout, the other is the study guide. Okay? So handout will sit around first, study guide's on its way. Just keep it going. Everybody have handouts? All right. So I'm going to walk you through just a little bit of new stuff since you took law, and then also walk you through where you need to be hanging out. Okay, that's about all that I have the time to do. But So it's going to be a little bit of just off to the races here, but we'll go through it. This link is probably different than what you had in law. Okay, so they've moved some stuff around at the state level. So this is the link where you can get to all your board rules. LexisNexis is still LexisNexis. Still annoying. You still got to click 14 times to get into anything. There's a little bit of the general Division of Health-related board stuff. Drug Control Act is in 53 and 39. And then a little bit of Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, and a couple other little areas. But that's where you're going to hang out. Those are the biggies. Okay? Those three things. So just here's some new stuff. The rules of the board are longer than when you took law. Okay? There's 4 other sections now. So there's one specific to long-term care facilities, which used to be grouped in with institutional. There's one on drug donation repository programs. There's one on prescribing hormonal contraceptives. And I'm blanking on the other one. You'll see it in a minute. I don't remember what it is. Shoot. No. Yep. We'll get there. What else did I want to... Oh, CSMD requirements are different as far as checking than when you took law. Okay? And then there's all kinds of new stuff with Tennessee Together and now Tennessee Together version 2 as of less than a month ago, right, that you need to pay attention to. So a lot of Tennessee Together, not a lot, some of Tennessee Together has been undone now or tried to fix it because it wasn't ideal based on what went into law last July. So a lot of new stuff in here. We're going to go through these real quick just as far as what you need to know in each one. So 1140.01, this is where all the definitions are. There's 40-something, I believe. You need to know what they are. This is where we also talk about pharmacist licensure. There's score transfer, which is in the first 12 months. And beyond that, it's reciprocity. Okay, so that's when you would license transfer from Tennessee to another state or from another state into Tennessee. There's that 12-month cutoff. Internship hours is 1,700. There's foreign grad hours. Inactive licenses, this is one that, if you remember, if you're going to have an active license in another state, you can't have an inactive license in Tennessee. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind. It depends on if you want to pay the professional privilege tax or not. Most people don't want to voluntarily. Practice site manufacturer wholesaler licenses. This is where it talks about how do you submit your application, what's your timeline from that, do you have to be inspected before you get up and running. What if you're an out-of-state pharmacy serving Tennessee patients? You've got to be registered with the board, you've got to be licensed with the board to do that. There's some minimum requirements there. I think we've talked about this. We talked about biennial renewal. There's an active duty military exception. And then there's a controlled substance registration that you'll get when you get licensed. If you're going to be handling controlled substances, it's like an extra $40 or something that you have to be able to dispense. There's a separate registration for sterile compounding now. And then all the pharmacy standards, like hot and cold running water, the minimum square footage, all that stuff is in 1140.112. This one's pretty, most of 1140.02 is self-explanatory. A lot of it is your code of ethics, how you're supposed to behave. I think you all know that. There's some language in there about what techs have to do to register with the board. Pharmacists in charge are the ones responsible for this and maintaining the list of technicians that are working. Nothing in there about pharmacists as far as the PIC's responsibility. Techs, yes. We talked about this briefly with the controlled substance. These are the things that, certified techs can do that non-certified can't. Okay? But you have to consider all of your rules and regulations when you're talking about this. So, receive new oral prescriptions, yes they can. That doesn't mean you have to let them either, right? That just says they're allowed to. It's not a right that they get to do that. Because at the end of the day, it's your license, right? Receive transfers, and then tech with barcode technology. That's something that is allowed for certified techs. 1140.02 talks about the pharmacist, the technician to pharmacist ratio. And I have this wrong. It should be, this is the tech, this is the pharmacist. Okay? So 2 to 1, you can go to 4 to 1 if you add 2 certified technicians. And then you can ask the board for permission to have more than that. And they can grant it if they so desire. 1140.03, I don't know how to tell you any more. This is probably the one you need to know the best for the Tennessee MPJE. This is a lot of stuff about label and counseling and transfers and all the nuts and bolts of pharmacy practice. Here in 1140.03, a lot of them are. Shall counsel on new prescriptions. What about on refills? Shall offer. Right? Shall counsel on new, shall offer on refills. Here's the labeling requirements, and you'll see that, hey, looky there. We added drug finally. Pharmacist absence, 1 hour. There's a lot of repackaging language in there. Here's an example of reporting to the board immediately. So DEA wants to know within 1 day, the board wants to know immediately. Okay? Selling syringes, proof of medical need. And then who can do that? Pharmacist, intern, or tech. And intern and tech are under the supervision of a pharmacist. Non-prescription insulin, same. And then there's a laundry list of PIC requirements in here. And then the board, if there's a change in PIC, that's again another notify immediately. Okay, this is different. This is long-term care facilities have been removed from this. This is all institutional now. There's a lot of different stuff in here about med carts, floor stock, emergency kits, home care kits. Inspections, one of the big differentiators here between 1140.14 and 1140.04 is the inspection frequency. So institutional, monthly. You'll see in long-term care facilities, quarterly. Okay, that's one of the things you need to know that. CEs, 30 every 2, we talked about that. 15 of those have to be live. If you're in postgrad training, you get a pass on your, they figure you're getting smart enough on your postgrad training, you don't need to do CE. And then it's an honor system, but you can and will be audited, and with the CPE monitor, it's pretty easy. 1140.06 is nuclear. You need to know the gist of that. I don't anticipate you'll get more than one question on the MPJE about nuclear. This one I think you'll get plenty. This is one, again, I think you need to know well. It's really detailed about USP 797 and things of that sort. I know folks that took it last year, this was a pretty hot topic, so you need to know this section good. There's quarterly required reporting to the board here for folks that do sterile product prep outside of hospitals. The labeling is different for sterile products. There's some additional things, and then there's also 2 different categories. One for if it's outpatient, one for if it's inpatient. So it lays it out pretty good. Hazardous products, there's a whole section on that as far as the type of certification, training, and then again, 797 is referred to a lot. This is an easy one. These are the 3 things that are considered when if you're going to get fined. This one has probably changed, and I don't remember if outsourcing facilities and oxygen suppliers were considered in this group when you took law. That's changed in the last couple of years. So they all have to be registered with the board or licensed with the board. There's a 5% rule in there as well. This one's awesome. Nothing. This one is different, but then this is where the rules aren't updated yet. So the rules in here are going to be wrong as far as how frequently pharmacists are supposed to check, okay, and prescribers. So they need to update the rules to reflect the recent statutes that have statutory changes. I think I covered that. I think I covered the TCA stuff in a minute. Alternative IDs. What happens if somebody doesn't have an ID or they refuse to provide it? 12 is about charitable clinics, right? Redispensing drugs that have been used like in a long-term care facility. I don't think you'll get many questions about that either, but I think you need to know the gist of what goes on there. Telepharmacy, this is the one where there are satellite pharmacies and federally qualified health centers, and you're going to use computer, audio, and video link to not have a pharmacist there. Right? So you don't have a pharmacist in the satellite pharmacy, you have a tech, and then you can do the dispensing process, counseling through FaceTime or the equivalent, and trying to allow dispensing to happen in areas that aren't going to be able to afford a pharmacist there.
The 2 tech per pharmacist or 4 still apply?
That's a good question. I would think so. Yeah. I think most often it's going to be 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 2, yes, those still apply. There's nothing in there that says that it wouldn't, so yeah, that it would. This is, you see 2s through 4s. I think this is a good MPJE question. C5s are allowed to be dispensed in satellite pharmacies. 2s through 4s are not. This is a good example, too, of language. This issue word. They define issue as dispense, okay? Which is not the way that issue was defined in the CFR with controlled substances, right? It was about allowing the prescription to exist. So there's some definitions in there probably good to be familiar with. Okay, 1140.04 and 1140.14 look very, very similar. There are a few differences, one of them being the amount of the inspections, monthly versus quarterly. And then there's some language in 1140.14 about automated dispensing devices. And otherwise, take institutional pharmacy out and replace with long-term care facility pharmacy, and it's a lot of the same stuff. Here's your prescribing and dispensing of hormonal contraceptives, which you're going to get later today. There's some required training in order to be able to do this, and so I think that's why you're getting this training this afternoon. The big difference between this and another collaborative practice agreement is this one can be non-patient specific, whereas your traditional collaborative practice agreement, patient specific. Okay, that's the big difference here, because there's nothing that would keep you from having the purview to prescribe or hormonal contraceptives through a standard collaborative practice agreement. This broadens it a little bit by making it non-patient specific. That's the goal. There's a required training. There's a required screening form. The process is laid out pretty in depth here. Oh, this is the one I forgot. Third-party logistics provider. Okay, this is the new 3PL is the shorthand for this. This is kind of the middleman between. Think of this as like the delivery company that the distributor might use to get the drug product to the purchaser. Okay, but it's specific to sterile products, and that's what we're talking about here. And so it's a lot of the same language as you'll find in 1140.09 with wholesalers, distributors, things like that. Only by law at the federal level, this has to be a completely different thing. So now we have a completely separate set of rules for third-party logistics providers. And then the last one is the Drug Donation Repository Program. This is confusing, and I had to clarify this with Dr. Dillard. When you go to the definitions here about prescription drug, it specifically calls out cancer drugs, and almost to the point where you think, well, these things are specific to cancer drugs, and that is not true. And what it comes down to is there was one of the legislators was kind of up in arms about the cost of cancer drugs and wanted cancer drugs to be explicitly mentioned in this definition. But it applies to all tablets, capsules. Okay, so when you go through here, don't get hung up on the cancer drug part. There's a couple different, there's like a step system. So indigent is the priority for these redispensed, and then if it's a drug that's not covered by an insurance, that's somebody else that could get it through the Drug Donation Repository Program. And another difference here is the records are kept for 5 years as opposed to 2 for a lot of the other records in Tennessee. All right, you got to know this stuff, right? You need to be hanging out here a lot. 83% is going to be on this combined with the federal stuff. I don't know how to go through this quickly. I'm gonna get you to where these are in LexisNexis, and some of these didn't exist. So if you remember how LexisNexis works, when there's a new statute, it just gets added to the end, right? So when you were in law and ethics, you probably stopped at about 157 or thereabouts. I think 160 and on are new to you. So these are ones where you need to go look. This is where a lot of the new opioid stuff is, out in the 160s here. Okay, remember 63.1 is really the general health-related board stuff, and then every profession will have specific language after that. So we get Chapter 10. So if you're going to hang out in Chapter 10, you want to spend most of it in 2, 3, and 7. Okay? Those are the parts that you want to hang out in. And that's what you're going to cover in here. This is pretty much the same as when you were in law. This is about the Board of Pharmacy composition, but a lot of this stuff will be new. A lot of these numbers at the end will be new to you. And if I skip one, like 05, don't worry about it. Like there's just stuff in there that's not going to be on the MPJE. So 2, 3, and 7 you need to know. 1, 4, 5, and 6, I think you need to just be able to know what they are. I don't think you're going to be asking anything really specific about them. And like 5 and 6, they go together with the rules of the board in 12 and 13. Right. There's a privilege tax. You'll have the privilege of paying it soon. How much is it? $400. Yeah. Yay. 53.1, I don't think that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, I don't think you're going to need to know this. Adulteration, misbranding stuff is very similar to the federal, so I think if you know the federal, you're good to go. The legend drug part, there's a couple things in here that you really, the part 1 and 2, you need to know in detail. Part 3 is about the CSMD. However, you need to know the checking requirements, so initial, and then every 6 months, for example, for pharmacists. Now, again, if you go to the 1140.11, it's not going to say that because it's not updated yet. But in the new statutes, first dispensing and then every 6 months after that. So if you know that part of this, and then 1140.11, you'll be good to go. Okay, these are where the drugs are listed in different schedules in Tennessee. So the big one, you need to know what differs from federal. Okay, so marijuana, what schedule is it in? Remember? 6. 6. The schedule, we have 7 schedules, right? That butyl nitrite is in 7. I have no idea why. And then you need to know gabapentin is schedule 5, but it's not federally yet, right? So those are the 3 biggies that I would know the difference. That research thing, I don't think you'll be asked, but if you do research, you have to have a specific registration with the board. Actually, I told you wrong. This isn't where this isn't the drugs. The drugs are in 4, I believe. Yeah. So the criteria for scheduling are in every other one, and the drugs are like C1s are in 406, then 408, 10, 12, 14. That's where the drugs are. To end, I think you need to know your immediate methamphetamine precursor stuff. So you've got your federal 3.6, then you've got your 30-day and yearly requirements that Tennessee puts in place, right? You need to know those. Dextromethorphan, the minimum age is 18. Yep. Yep, you need to know that stuff. That's the end. I mean, I know that's really quick. So do some prep, right? If you have questions about whether you should do the review, feel free to ask. If you want me to test you, or let me know. So, and you don't need to don't feel obligated to do that review that I offer. So I didn't start doing that review for ETSU students. I started doing it for whoever wants to do it. So there'll be people here from all over. So it's fun, but if you feel like it's 15 hours, it's about 15 hours of study time, right? So if it's worth you to do that, then go for it. But again, if you have questions about it, if it's worth it, reach out to me. I'm happy to help you. Okay? Go fight win. You can do this. I would love for that 69 from last year to be a 96 again this year.